Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Peitet. Today's daf is sponsored by Becky Goldstein in loving memory of Amram Baim. He was my husband's chavruta who shared his ahavat Torah, whether learning Pirkei Avot with her children on Shabbatot or founding the English Kollel for Anglos to learn Talmud. Learning the daf with his Gemarot is a zichut. Yehi zichro baruch. Okay, we're going to get started with the first line on today's daf. Chatzi log shemen letodah. We're back to the Mishnah. A half a log of shemen for the korban todah. How do we get that, and how do we know that it was split in this uneven manner? Half of it, a quarter log, went to the revucha, and the other half, which was quarter log, was split between the rikikin and the chalot. If you remember, altogether those are 30 chalot that are matzahs. 10 of them are the revucha, and then 20 of them get the same amount that the 10 get. So where does this all come from? Tanya, we're going to have a braita with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Matamud Lamar b'shemen shnei pamim. Okay, what we're talking about is in the pasuk about all the different loaves. V'imol todah yakrivenu. If you bring a korban todah, v'yikriv al zevach hatodah chalot matzot b'lulot b'shemen, u'rikikei matzot mishuchim b'shemen. So you need chalot matzot which have shemen. You need the rikikei matzot which have shemen, and sholet murbechet chalot b'lulot b'shemen. And then it ends with the murbechet. Also the revucha we're going to talk about that also gets shemen. If you remember, those are the ones that are boiled, baked, right, like bagels, and then fried. That's why they end up, by the way, with more oil. But we're going to see where we get this from. So Rabbi Akiva says, why do you need? He first focuses on the fact that b'shemen appears twice in the first part of the pasuk about the rikikim and the chalot matzot. Matamud lamar b'shemen shnei pamim. So why does it say b'shemen two times? If it just said it once, I would have said it's like regular minchas that need a log of oil. But the fact that it says it twice teaches us it's an expansion and then another expansion. Every time you have a word that comes to expand and then another word that comes to expand, it's like a double negative. You have two ribuyim, that actually means it's less. Instead of a log, we're going to drop down to a half a log. So to which the Gemara, they ask, wait, what do you mean? Chad ribuy haribuy, chad ribuy hava. Chad ribuyahu. I say, wait a minute. Why don't you just say, it says b'shemen first to say they need oil, and the second time is just an expansion on that. So there would be only one riboy, not a riboy hariboy. Again, they're only focusing right now on the first two. Ela ilu lo ne'emar b'shemen kol ikar, hayiti omer, hareu kechol menachot lelog. So now they say, no, well, if it had just said b'shemen, hadn't said it at all, I would have assumed, I don't need one to tell me it has oil, because every standard mincha has oil, other than when we're told it doesn't. So, since every standard one has oil, I would have assumed it had oil. And that's why we have a riboy hariboy, and therefore, ein riboy hariboy. Achshav shenemar b'shemen havi riboy hariboy. So now that we have b'shemen twice, it must be an expansion and another expansion of ein riboy hariboy ela lema'et, and therefore miyato katuv l'chatzi log. That's just repeating, because they basically said, where did you get that from? Maybe the first one is for itself, and then the second one is expanding. No, the first one isn't really needed for itself. It's kind of obvious. Well now, okay, we have a half a log. Now you would assume maybe, though, the half log is divided evenly between the three types, right? The 30 loaves, each 10 should get the same amount, right? Which would have been taking a half log divided by 3, you would get a sixth for each. Lechalot u'lerikikim u'lerivicha for the 3 different types. But that last Bisham there in the pasuk with oil, she'en tamud lomar. The third one is really unnecessary. Riba shemen l'revicha. So that's again an expansion. What's it telling you? This particular one gets more than the others. And therefore, haketzad, how would that work? Maybe chatzi log shemen v'chotzei. You bring a half a log, split it in half. Chatzio l'chalo l'rikikin v'chatzio l'revucha. And that's how we get that we divide it unevenly. Half log for the 2. And half of the half log, a quarter log for the 2, and a quarter log for the revicha. Amar lo Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Now comes Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and disagrees with Rabbi Akiva. Now we're going to see that there's a debate about what exactly he disagrees I'm going to just mention it. It's a debate among the commentaries. The Gemara doesn't explain, but we're going to see from the Gemara what it seems he disagrees about, and then what the different possibilities are. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, Akiva, imatamar bekol hayom kulo b'shem and eini shomei alecha. You can keep darshaning how many times it says b'shem and keep going. I'm not going to listen to you at all. Okay, I don't believe what you're saying. Ela chatzi log shemen letoda, urevi'it shemen lenazir, v'achadasar yom shebei nida lenida, halacha l'Moshe miSinai. What does he say? Basically, he says this halacha is halacha l'Moshe miSinai. It was a very old tradition, and that's where it comes from, not from your pasuk. Okay, so the first option is to say, and we'll talk about the three things in halacha l'Moshe miSinai, but right now we're focusing on the first one. And it says here the chatzi log shemen for the toda is learned out by halacha l'Moshe miSinai. So one limited view of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is saying he actually doesn't disagree that you need a half a log, but he does disagree about how the half log is divided. That's one possible way, okay? He basically says, I agree with you that there's a half log. I disagree with you about where you get it from, the riboy hariboy. I disagree with that. Okay, I get it from a tradition, but it could be, now that's for sure what they disagree about, at least minimally. So either they just disagree about where it comes from, this halacha, and perhaps they also disagree about how it's divided. Okay? Perhaps Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah doesn't have this tradition that Rabbi Akiva has, or the way, the drasha about how it's divided. Half goes to 10 and half goes to 20 of them. Maybe he thinks it's divided evenly. We don't know. Okay? It's possible he disagrees about that. It's possible he agrees with everything that Rabbi Akiva says, just has a different way of getting it, and says the whole thing, I agree with every point you make, just not about how you get it from the psukim. Okay, so it's possible that they don't disagree on any practical point and just drasha, or it's possible that he just agrees about the half log, but perhaps has other disagreements about him within this, since he doesn't agree with his drashot at all. Maybe doesn't divide the same way. Okay, we're not sure. So that's a debate among the commentaries. But the main point is he says it's all a tradition. Now, what else does he say is a tradition? The fact that the revi'it shemen for the nazir has a quarter log of shemen, which we saw, right? That comes from the nazir has 2/3 of these 30 loaves, and the 2/3 are the rikikim and the chalot matzot, and therefore it's a quarter log, according to Rabbi Akiva, right? So it would be a quarter log also here. So if we go with that, then maybe, so again, it's unclear whether he learns that halacha l'Moshe miSinai and the fact that we learn the nazir from the rikikin and the chalot of the toda is a different approach. And he just says, look, there's half a log for this, quarter log for that. They're not connected at all. And the fact that we learned in the past that they are connected is a different approach. Or maybe he also just says, oh yeah, we learned the quarter log of a nazir is derived from the half log, the half of the half log of the toda could also be the fact that we learn one from the other. Is halacha l'Moshe miSinai. So that's also, again, different ways to read that. And the 11 days between Nida and Nida, which we're going to deal with a lot when we get to Masechet Nida, B'ezrat Hashem in a year. It will be our last Masechet before finishing Shas. So let's talk about that for a brief minute. In the Torah, there's Nida and Zava, and they're both different bleeding that a woman can have. One is menstrual blood, and one is when it's not the time of her menstruation. Now, when would that be? So the halacha l'Moshe miSinai tells us, how do we determine whether it's the time or not the time? The 11 days after the first 7 days of her menstruating. So the next 11 days are potential Zava days. After that, in day 19 already goes back if she sees blood then. It'll be considered Nida blood already, which basically means the shortest cycle of a woman could be 19 days. Okay, that's the halacha here. Now, and there's all different halachot, whether it's Nida, whether it's Zava. We'll get into all that when we get there. Bilog hayamodeh. Now we're back to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah had said, you always measure for the regular minchas, meaning the voluntary ones. However many esronim you bring, you always measure the oil using the log measuring cup. Now then we said the chachamim say basically that you're going to do a log for every isaron. So if you have 60 esronim, you're going to measure 60 log, and you're always going to use that one log measuring cup. Then we had Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, who said every mincha offering, doesn't matter how many esronim you have, you're always going to use a log of oil in all the voluntary mincha offerings. So now we're going to have a braita, which is going to have where do they each get it from pasuk, and then we're going to have the ping pong back and forth. What does each one do with the other one's pasuk? So Tanu Rabbanan, b'mitzora ani ktiv, that was the pasuk we saw in the Mishnah. In the mitzora of a poor person, if a poor person can't afford the 3 korbanot you're supposed to bring, the 3 animal sacrifices, so they bring 1 animal sacrifice with its libation. Now, it says there, isaron balul v'log. Okay, we're skipping some words. It says you should bring an isaron. Okay, it's in next week's parsha. So b'yom hashmini, on the 8th day, yikach shnei kvasim to, no, that's the wrong pasuk. Im dalhu ve'ein yado masegev vayikra yudale pasuk of aleph. If he's poor and he can't afford it, v'lakach keves echad hasham l'tnufa lechaper alav. So he brings this 1 sheep. V'isaron solet echad. You bring 1 isaron of solet balul b'shemen mixed with oil. Lemincha as a mincha offering. V'log shemen, and 1 log of oil. So now, what does it say here? There's an isaron. Okay, they're skipping some words of solet. Balul, it's mixed, and then it says v'log, and a log of oil. So they say isaron, balul, v'log. Limeda isaron sh'to'un log. From those 3 words, they derive, even though they're right next to each other, but they derive every isaron needs a log, and that's where the Chachamim's opinion comes from. Divrei Chachamim. Rabbi Nechemya, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Now we see that Rabbi Nechemya was with Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, in his opinion. Omrim afilu mincha shel 60 esronim en la'ela luga. Even if you have a mincha of 60 esronim, you still only have a log. Okay, you only bring a log. Shenemau l'mincha v'log shemen. This we saw in the Mishnah. It says at the end of that pasuk, the last 3 words, kind of taking them out of context, a mincha and a log shemen. That means every mincha needs a log shemen. Okay, even though that's not the way to read the pasuk. Really, there's a comma after the mincha. Bring this as a mincha with a log of shemen. Rabbi Nechemya and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So now the Gemara asks, "Hi isaron balul v'log my avdile." So what do they do with those words? Isaron balul v'log. So how will it go? I say very simply, it's needed to tell you how much you're supposed to bring. You're supposed to bring an isaron mixed in with a log of oil. Okay, the exact measurements of what you're supposed to bring. The Torah tells you bring an isaron, bring it with a log of oil. V'idach. Now, again, you wouldn't really need the log because anytime you need a log, but the point is you need an isaron. That's the amount of flour that you bring for this mincha offering. Idach. So the rabbis, how can they darshan it for something else if you need to teach how big is the isaron that the mitzvah needs to bring, that the leper brings? Well, legufei lo tzarich. You don't need a pasuk for this. Why? Because it already said by the mitzvah, by the leper who can afford the bigger sacrifice, shlosha korbanot ushlosha esronim. They bring, the leper who can afford it brings 3 animals and brings 3 esronim of solet. So just do the math. If you bring 3 sacrifices, you bring 3 esronim. Then if you bring only 1 sacrifice, you bring 1 isaron. So I don't need a pasuk to tell you that, right? Hachad echad korban. This one has only 1 korban, chad isaron. Obviously, you're only going to bring 1 isaron. Okay, well, Rabbi Nechemya and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, what are they going to say to that? V'idach. Right? Their whole thing was they had to know in isaron. You wouldn't have known it otherwise. Why not? It's strich, you need it. Why? Sal kadat hachamina hu yavachas rachmana leila tuye b'dalut. Well, the Torah already had rachmanut. They had sympathy for this person and said, listen, you don't have to bring the full korban, right? You don't have to bring 3, just bring 1. Ema lo libai mincha klal. Maybe the Torah is exempting him from the mincha also. Because, right, if they're already exempting from korbanot, maybe they'll say, listen, you don't even have to bring a mincha to save the money. So that's why it needed to tell you specifically, no, you bring a mincha anyway. Now, where the rabbi's going to say this, the rabbi said, I don't need the pasuk to tell me that. So they're going to answer, Idach legamri lo eshkachan. There's no way that the leper would be completely exempted from bringing a mincha. Right? That, yes, we could lower from 3 to 1 in the sacrifice, and then we'll lower from 3 to 1 in terms of how big your mincha needs to be. But we're not going to say, oh, you completely don't have to bring a mincha, okay? And therefore, they don't think that part is necessary and it's kind of obvious, and therefore they use it for the drasha. So that was all the back and forth. What did Rabbi Nechemya and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov do with that drasha? Oh, they just don't have that drasha. They don't need a drasha because they think those words are coming for the simple meaning. Now we're going to do the reverse. We're going to say Rabbanan, Haile Mincha V'Log Shamem, my Avdele. What do they do at the end of that pasuk? It's for someone who voluntarily offers a mincha, even though that's not what's talking about in the pasuk, but it's used as a drasha for that, right? Both of them are taking it completely out of context. It's to tell you, you always have to bring a log of oil with your mincha, every mincha offering, which means that has to come along with an isaron. In other words, you need the minimum, your minimum measurement for a mincha is whatever goes with one log. And what goes with one log? Well, according to the rabbis, it's an isaron per log. So basically what it's telling you is the smallest mincha you can bring. If you say, I'm going to bring a mincha to the temple, has to be at least an isaron. And then obviously you do the log with that isaron. If you do 2 esronim, you do 2 logim. Okay, but that already isn't what it's saying here. That's, their drasha from isaron balu v'log. Right, the mincha v'log shemen is talking about the minimum amount of a mincha offering. Now we're going to get to Shishala Par Ba'ala Ayel Shlashala Keves. Minalam. Where does this come from? And by the way, I realized my mistake yesterday. When I was trying to come up with the part in the davening that we say, I got confused. Why did I get confused? Because the part in our davening in the Shalosh Regalim that we say with in Musaf, we say Shlosha Esronim Lapal V'Shnei Esronim La'ayel V'Saron Lekeves. It's talking about the solet, not about the oil. My mistake. The pasuk about the oil comes up in the Rosh Chodesh Pesukim. Okay, how much oil is Shisha Lapar Ba'ala Ayel Shlosha Lekeves? Where does that come from? We're going to read it right now. Dechtiv v'niskehem chatziyahin yelapal. This is the pasuk in the Rosh Chodesh offerings, where it says you're supposed to bring chatziyahin lapal. Okay, they don't quote the whole pasuk, but shlishit hayin la'ayil, revi'it hayin lekeves yayin. Zot olah chodesh b'chodshol chodshei hashana. The libations of the oil of the wine, which also includes the same amount as the libations of the oil, is half a hin, which a hin, if you remember, we're going to see it right now, is 12 log. Hin treser loge havyan. So a chatzia hin is half, which is 6. That's how we get 6 for the par. A shlishit hin la'ayil, which is a third of a hin for the ram, that's going to be 4. And a quarter for the keves is going to be 3. Okay, because it all comes from 12. How do we know that a hin is 12? Well, dechtiv shemen zayit hin, uchtiv shemen mishchat kodesh yezeli ledorotechem. This is the shemen zayit is a hin. That's what you need for the shemen mishcha. And it also says about, right, that was the oil Moshe used to anoint the vessels and the kohanim and all sorts of things that were anointed. Shemen mishchat kodesh, this oil, Yezeli. This will be for me. The word zeh, this is not where they get it from, it doesn't seem, but it's a way to remember it. Zeh begematria treser havyan. Zeh in gematria 7 and 5 is 12, and from there they get that it's 12. Okay, so a hin is 12, and that's how they got to these numbers. Shlosha v'mechze lemenorah, chatzi log lechol ner. Okay, now we get back to the menorah. So there were 3.5 log, and then there was a half log for each candle. Minani mili, where do we get that they need a half a log? Here we're going to learn something interesting. Detanu Rabbanan, interesting from kind of a different perspective, you'll see in a minute. Me'erev haboker, ten lamidatash shedoleket v'olecha me'erev haboker. Okay, it talks about the candles that Aaron's supposed to set up the candles from erev haboker, from evening till morning. What do they darshan from this? 2 different things. They don't contradict each other, but 2 different drashot. One is me'erev haboker, put in the amount, shetehei doleket, that it will stay lit, v'olechet me'erev haboker. You need an amount that's going to go from the night to the morning. Davar acher, this is completely unrelated, but since we're on this braita, different drasha, me'erev haboker, and l'chavodah shekshera me'erev haboker ela zo bilvad. There's only one avoda that's kasher from the night to the morning. It's different interpretations what this means, because you really have to light it at night. It's not like you could do it all night long. Some people say, well, if you forget, you could do it later in the night. Some people say, no, that's completely not the case. But it could be, some people explain that it means that you start it at night, or you can do it, right? You really do it around Shkia when the sun sets. But then it's the last thing you do in the temple until the morning. There's no other avodot you do until the morning, and that's why it says Erev Boker. That's what it means here, that there's no other avodah that you can do in that time frame where the candles are lit then. Anyway, back to the first drasha, it said, put in the amount you need for it to light from the night to the morning. Now, obviously, different times of year, it's going to need a different amount because on the longest nights of the year, you're going to need more. So basically what they had to do was come up with what's the amount that's going to work even on the longest days of the year. So Shiaru Chachamim, they estimated or measured, really, right? It seems more here measured. We're going to see in a minute. Here comes the interesting part. Chatzi log me'or tavad safra. It's a half a log from the night till the morning. That's how much you need. Okay, that doesn't sound so interesting yet. Well, how'd they figure this out? Ika da amre. Okay, basically we're going to say they figured it out by trial and error. But how did they do it? So the first opinion says, mila mala lamata shiaru. They started with a larger amount, like they started with a log, and every night they took away a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, until they figured out, oh, we really only need a half a log. Some people say they started out with, let's say, a quarter log, and then they went up a little bit, up a little bit, up a little bit, until they got to half a log. Okay, what's the difference? Manda amar mi mata lamala shiaru. The one who starts with the low says they started with a lower amount and added a little more, a little more, a little more. HaTorah chasal mamonan shel Yisrael. Same thing we keep going back to. The Torah felt bad and didn't want them spending too much money. So basically the idea was start small, add a little more, a little more, a little more until you get to the right amount. We don't want to have any waste going on, any wasted money. We want them to buy enough oil to put a log in each cup when they really didn't need it. So they started with a less amount and built up. Umanda amar mimala lamata shiaru, the one who said they started with a higher number, ein aniyut b'mkom hashilut. There's no poverty in a place of wealth, right? A place of splendor. This is the temple for God. Has to be everything perfect. So you can't have it that they're not going to last all night. So you can't, when you're testing it out, you have to go on the larger number, the higher number, right? The higher amount, and then go down, 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 whittle it down. Okay, and this is always, like we've talked about, this pull between, on the one hand, Torah chasal mamonan shel Yisrael, on the other hand, ein aniyut b'mkom hashivut. And as I mentioned already before, this Shir of Alana Steinheim, which talks about this concept, delves more into it, worth listening to. Okay, it's a very, very interesting topic. Okay, now we're going to move on. Ma'arvin niskei parim b'niskei elim. Okay, this mission is going to be a little bit of a challenge to figure out what exactly this mission means. So we're going to start with understanding it the way the Gemara first understands it. Nisachim, okay, and the tricky part here is that Nisachim can refer to different things. There's mincha libations, then you also refer to the oil as Nisachim, and then there's the wine, which are also Nisachim. Now, the difference between the wine and the mincha is the mincha gets burned on the altar. We'll talk about why that's important soon. And the wine gets poured down those holes at the top. Remember, there was a cup that sat, and underneath there was a hole, and then it went shoot all the way down to the ground, right? It was like a whole hollow area in the Mizbech where it went down all the way to the ground. That was at the top of the Mizbech. So the wine gets poured and the mincha gets burned. So now we're going to talk about, if you remember, we just learned that the parim and the elim and the kvasim each had a different amount of, number one, solet, okay, 3 asronim lapar, 2 asronim la'ayil, isaron echad lekebes, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we go from larger animal to smaller animal, bull, ram, sheep. So 3, 2, 1. When it came to oil, we had 6, 4, 3. Okay, now notice it's not exactly the same. So if we talk about the ratio, 3 solet, 3 flour to 6 oil, okay, for the par. 1 to 2 ratio, 3 to 6, 1 to 2. The ayil is the same ratio. It's 2 to 4. 2 solet, 4 oil. The keves, though, is different. 1 to 3. 1 isaron, 3 log oil. Okay, so that's not the same ratio. That's 1 to 3. Okay, or if you talk about oil to solet, it's going to be 3 to 1 rather than 2 to 1. Rather than double, it's triple the amount of oil. So now they're going to explain. That's why the niskei parim and niskei elim you can mix, because they have the same. Now we're assuming, what are we talking about here? The mincha offerings. You have a mincha of this, a mincha of that. You can mix them because in the end the oil to solet ratio is the same. It's not going to mess up. So you're going to have 4 esronim for this one, 3 esronim for that one. 3 esronim, 2 esronim, and with the oil, okay, you're going to have in the end the same ratio. Okay, so in the end you'll have 5 esronim with 10 log of oil. But niskei kvasim, sheep you can mix with other sheep ones because the sheep ones all have the same ratio. Shel yachid b'shel tzibur, it doesn't matter if they're public or private, individual ones, or public offerings, communal offerings, it's fine. Shel yom b'shel emesh, you can mix, turning out amabet, you can mix yesterday's with today's, because if you remember, The libations could be brought within 10 days of you having brought the sacrifice. It doesn't matter. Yesterday's, today's, they can all be mixed. Ava, but what can't you mix? Aim arvin niskei kvasim and niskei parim ve'elim. Okay, you obviously can't mix the ones with the sheep together with the ones with the bulls or the rams because the oil is a different amount. You're going to end up with the wrong ratio of oil in each offering, basically. But if you already mixed the dough and you have a dough for the sheep and a dough for the ram, and they then mixed up because you already mixed it, not really worried about the oil going from one to the other because it's already a dough. But if it hasn't yet been mixed together, pasul, then it's disqualified. Because then, again, you're going to have the wrong amount of oil. At least that's the way we understand the Mishnah right now. Then the Mishnah continues with something else, which is hakeves habayim ha'omer, the sheep that comes with the korban ha'omer offering. A piece of there was a mincha ha'omer, and then there was an animal that was brought also. Now, with the animal, we bring a libation, and it says in the pasuk, afal pisha minchato kfula. Now, the solet is double. You bring 2 esronim of solet, but even though usually with the sheep you only bring 1, lo ayu nisachav kfulim. But the wine and the oil that went with it wasn't doubled. Okay, so only the solet was doubled, as it says in the pasuk, but not the wine and the oil, and we'll see where we get that from at the end of today's stuff. First part we have to understand is the Mishnah. The Gemara starts off and says, Raminu. It's a complete contradiction to our Mishnah. It says, comes to the parts you burn on the altar, the fatty parts of the sacrifices, specifically by the shlamim, the peace offering. It says, Vihiktiro hakohen hamizbecha, lechem mishel Hashem. It says, and the kohen burns it. Now, it is the fats, which should be plural. Why does it say iktiro? It. So it comes to teach us, shelo ya'arev chalavim b'chalavim. You can't mix fatty parts of different offerings and burn them together. And therefore, they're going to assume likewise, you can't mix minchas and burn them together. Forget about the ratio. Even if the ratio is the same, you can't mix them. That seems to completely contradict our Mishnah. So, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, im nitavru kamar. So he says, our Mishnah just means if they already did. You can't lechatchila put them together in order to burn them on the altar. But if they are, then it's fine. But the Gemara says that can't work because ihachi ve'em arvin niskei kvasim and niskei parim ve'elim. It says you can't, in the second part of the Mishnah, what does it say? You can't mix the kvasim with the parim and the elim. Va'afilu nitarvu namilo. And even if they get mixed up, you also, it's a problem. V'hamid katane seifa, and the fact that it says at the later part, balalan elu b'fnei atzman ve'elu b'fnei atzman v'nitarvu ksherim, right? Then it says at the later part of the Mishnah, right, and it's right after that, it says, if you already did it though, then it's fine. Michlal de reisha lechatchila kamar, which seems like in the reisha, before that it must be talking about ideally you can't, but if you did, which basically means that ideally you can mix them. Okay? And it's very hard to say the Mishnah is talking about after the fact, because only later in the Mishnah does it start mentioning after the fact. Earlier in the Mishnah it wasn't saying after the fact. So it wasn't talking about after the fact. So Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation that the Mishnah was after the fact, but ideally you shouldn't mix them at all, even the ones that are the same, that doesn't make any sense. So, moving on. Amar Abai. Abai gives a different answer. Hachi kamar. Marvin yenam im nitarev saltan v'shamnan. What it means is, you can mix the wine, libations. It's not talking about, that's why I said in the beginning, libations are tricky, because it could mean mincha, it could mean wine. And I say, actually, it's not talking about mincha like you thought. It's talking about the wine. You can mix the wine of the kvasim, kvasim with kvasim. You can mix, right, sheep with sheep. You can mix bulls with rams if you want. Okay, why? Now, what's the issue? Well, the amounts and the ratio only matters for the mincha. So what does the wine have to do with the mincha? Well, now here comes. Maravim yenam im nitarev saltam v'shamnam. What's the issue? The issue is we don't really want you mixing the wine, because you might then come to say, if I mix the wine of the ram and the bull, maybe I can also mix the shemen and the solet. And the shemen and the solet, we don't want you mixing at all. Okay? Forget about whether it has the same ratio or not. The point is that you can mix the wine if you already mix the solet and the shemen together. Okay? If they're already combined, then we can mix the wine because we're not worried that you might come to combine them. Well, they already got combined. Now remember what we said before. If they already got mixed, then we'll let it go. Okay? So if they already got mixed, then it's fine. And then you can even mix the wine ideally because it's fine. Because then there's no concern, what if I mix the shem and the soul that you already did anyway? Okay, so now, Gemara says, okay, but that sounds like you can only mix the wine if the solet and the shemen got mixed up. But if, let's say, you're talking about rams and bulls, or sheep and sheep, it sounds like you can't do it ideally, though, because maybe you'll mix the other parts, right? And we don't want you mixing the solet and the shemen at all. But but doesn't it say in a braita? So this makes it sound, Abaye's reasoning, that yayin you can't mix lechatchila only if it's already the oil and the solet were mixed already, got mixed up. So b'med dvarim amurim in this braita it says, in what case are we talking about? B'solet v'shemen. Aval yayin ma'arvim. Sounds like the problem is only solet and shemen. But you could mix oil even ideally. Now that's not what it says with the way Abaye explained it. So El Amar Abaye corrects. He says, listen, what I really meant was this. Hecha dihuktar saltan v'shamnan marvim yayin lechatchila. If we already burnt the mincha offering, then you can ideally, when it said in this braita and when it said in our Mishnah, no problem to mix them. What was it talking about? It was talking about wine libations, and there's no problem to mix it ideally from the start if you already burn the mincha. If you burn the mincha, then you burnt it already. You're good. You don't have to worry. Nothing. This wine will never lead to anything getting mixed because you already burnt the minchas. So of course you're not going to end up mixing the mincha offerings of these two types, and therefore you can even do it lechatchila. Hecha de lo huktar. But if it's not burned, now we have different stages. If it's not burned, we're going to have actually 3 stages. The Gemara talks about 2, but I'll add in a third. Okay, there's either they got combined or they weren't combined at all. Okay, so hecha de lo huktar, it wasn't burned yet. Im nitarev saltan v'shamnad, if the 2 offerings ended up solen and shemen got mixed together of 2 offerings, marvim nami yenam, then you don't have to worry about the wine because you can mix the wines together because there's no concern you're going to mix the solet and the shemen together, the mincha offerings, because they already got mixed up. V'im lav, but if they're not mixed up at all, then there's the concern. And then we don't allow the wine to be mixed up. Ein ma'arvim, dil ma'ate la'aruve solet v'shemen lechatchila. Then you might come to say, oh, well, if I can mix the wines, I can mix the oil and the solet together. Okay? So basically what we're going to say is like this. And I have to add one more piece because this doesn't really seem to distinguish between sheep and bulls and rams, right? Which we already said there was a differentiation here. So what they basically sound like they're saying is, if we're talking about bulls and rams, let's say, or sheep and sheep, where we can mix them, but again, we shouldn't ideally mix them at all. We shouldn't mix the minchas. If the minchas got mixed up, it's fine. Even if they weren't all balalu mixed up together. Okay, because remember, the balalu only came up with the sheep and sheep. With the sheep and bulls, when you mix 2 different ones. But if they're of the same or similar type, same ratio, we don't want to mix the solet and shemen at all. But if they got mixed up, it's fine, because in the end, they have the same ratio. So even if we didn't even mix it yet, right, there's going to be 2 stages here. One is they got combined together, and the other is they got mixed up together. Combined is not yet mixed, okay? So if they got combined together, then it's fine, okay? Even if they weren't yet mixed, because in the end, it's all the same ratio. So we want to avoid that if we can. So don't mix the wine if you haven't gotten to that stage yet, right? If they haven't gotten mixed up and they're completely separate, because you might come to mix them. But if they already got mixed up, it's fine. And then you can do the wine. No problem. If we're talking about sheep and bulls or sheep and rams, which are different ratios, then the line is going to be drawn at a different place. It's not only, okay, if they got mixed up, that's not good enough. Because if they haven't gotten mixed up together, the dough, it's a problem. We don't want you to mix the dough together. So if you mix the doughs already and then they got mixed up together, then we're going to let you do the wine. If we haven't, then we're not going to let you do the wine, because then you might come to combine all the doughs together, and that will be a problem. Okay, so the new way of reading the Mishnah is really that the subject of the Mishnah is all wine, about mixing wine libations and not mixing the solet and the shemen, because you can never ideally mix the shemen and the solet, even in an offering where they're the same. We definitely don't want that to happen in an ideal way, only if it happened already, and then depending on what happened, okay, at what stage are we going to allow it or not, depends on the belila, right? If they're mixed, doughs separate, and then they get combined, then we're going to let that go when it's sheep and bulls. Otherwise, we're not going to let it go at all. If they weren't mixed up separate, right? If they weren't made separate doughs and it's all mixed up together, that's completely a problem. Okay, and then obviously the wine's going to be a problem as well. Okay, now we get to the keves habayim omer. We have the sheep that comes with the omer offering, where we said we double the mincha, the solet, but we don't double the oil and we don't double the wine. Where we get that from? Tanu Rabbanan. The Braita says, uminchato shnei esronim. The mincha is 2 esronim. Limed al keves habayim omer sheminchato kfula. So it says explicitly in the pasuk. This is in Vayikra chapter 23. It says the mincha for the omer offering is 2 esronim. Yachol kshem sheminchato kfula kach yeno kaful. So you might have thought, just like the mincha is doubled, so is the wine. Well, Talmud Lomar v'nisko yayin revi'i tahim. Well, it says very, very clearly the wine libation that goes with it is a quarter log, which is the regular amount, right? I'm sorry, a quarter of a hin. Quarter of a hin, again, that's what you usually bring for the sheep, 3 log for the sheep. Okay, so 3 log of wine, not 6 log, which would be double. Yacholo yehi no kaful. Okay, so we get fine. You might not double the wine because she'eno nivla minchato, because you don't mix the wine with the mincha. So just because the mincha has more solet doesn't necessarily mean the wine has more solet. Aval yesham no kaful shenivla minchato. But wouldn't it be logical then? You would double the amount of oil, because if a regular wine is 1 isaron to 3 log, so this one should be 2 isaron to 6 log. Talmud Lamal v'nisko, but it says there nisko yayin revi'i tahin, and the word nisko comes to include also the oil. We're going to have to figure out where they get that from, but right now they're going to say nisko kol nisachav lo yu ela revi'i. All the libations are revi'i the log, revi'i hahin, a quarter of a hin, 3 log. So now the Gemara says, my Talmud, how do you get it from that word? And this is going to be based on the kri uchtiv, the way it's written and the way it's pronounced. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, Ktiv v'niska, it's written with a hey. Even though it's nisko at the end, okay, it should be a vav, but it's written with a hey. Niska. Now niska means its libation in the feminine form. Nisko is its libation in the masculine form. Now if it's its libation in the feminine, what's the feminine? The mincha's libation, which is the oil. And if it's nisko with a vav, the masculine, it's the wine libation, because that's masculine. So that's what they're going to say now. It says nisko, vikarina nisko. Now, it says niska, it says it with a hey, but it's pronounced as nisko, which is with a vav. Haketzad, how does that work? Niska de mincha ke nisko di yayin. So from there they learn the libation of the mincha is just like the libation of the wine. Ma yayin revi'it, af shemer nami revi'it. So just like the wine is a quarter of a hin, also the oil is a quarter of a hin, and that's how we get to the halacha in the Mishnah. Now, because of this halacha in the Mishnah, we're going to get off on a tangent, complete tangent that's going to come back and bring up this keves that comes with the omer and the double mincha. But really, we're going to start with something completely different. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Asham mitzoraf. You have the korban asham of a leper. Sheshachato shelo lishmo. Now, the korban asham of a leper needs libations. No other asham needs libations, just the one of the mitzorah. So what if you bring the asham mitzorah shelo lishma? So let's go back to the first mission in Tzvachim. What do we learn? If you bring it shelo lishma, you slaughter it, let's say, with the intent of bringing it, let's say, as a burnt offering. Then what happens? Well, you bring it anyway as an asham. And in this case, as an asham mitzorah, because that's what it's for. But the leper doesn't fulfill their obligation, and they have to bring a new one. But it's brought as an asham mitzorah in the end. Okay, it sacrifices it as what it is. So therefore, comes Rabbi Yochanan and says, if you slaughtered it, shelo lishmo, te'un nisachim, you need to bring it with libations, because even though other ashams don't need libations, but since you sheim iyata omer kem salto, because in the end you have to bring this for an asham mitzorah, even though it's not going to fulfill the obligation for that leper, but it still have to sacrifice as an asham mitzorah, and asham mitzorah needs libations, so this is going to need libations. Okay, seems pretty straightforward. Matkafa Rav Menachot bar Gada. So Rav Menachot bar Gada comes and says, according to what you're saying, now we get back to this. If we take this sheep that goes with the omer and you slaughtered it, shelo lishmo. Now, normal kvasim, right? How do you bring them? With 1 isaron. But the keves that comes with the omer needs 2 esronim. So what nisachim are you going to offer? Well, according to Rabbi Yochanan saying, right, from what you're saying, keves abayim omer sheshachto shelo lishma tein mechato kfula. It must need a double mincha, because, right, double the amount of solet. Because what is it if not, right? If it was originally, now again, it's not going to fulfill your obligation of this omer, because it was brought shelo lishmo. But, right, again, you slaughter the sheep shelo lishmo, so the libate, you have to bring it with the double mincha anyway, because otherwise, now remember, You're not going to be fulfilling your obligation of the Omer, but you have to bring it anyway, as it was supposed to. So Menachot bar Gada's question is, Rabbi Yochanan, why did you specifically talk about an Asham, an Asham Mitzorah? You should have talked about this also. You should have said, anytime there's some unique halacha for this particular sacrifice, then if it's done for the wrong intent, since you anyway have to bring it as itself, as what it was meant to be, well then, when you bring it as it was meant to be, it has to come with all the details of how it was meant to be. So if it was the keves that came with the omer, that was done shalol lishmo, then you would have to continue and sacrifice it the right way it was supposed to be with the double mincha. And if so, why didn't you say that, Rabbi Yochanan? And he's going to give two more examples. Tamid shel shachar, the korban tamid in the morning, sheshachato shalol lishmo, that was done for the sake of the wrong korban. Yei ta'un shni gzirim b'kohen echad. It's halacha that you have to bring 2 pieces of wood to put on the big maracha on the altar before bringing the korban tamid. Those have to be burnt, and they have to be brought by 1 kohen in the morning. And we're going to see in a minute 2 kohanim have to bring the 2 pieces of wood, each one a piece, in the afternoon. Okay? So, again, if you brought the tamid shel shachar shelo lishma, you would have to sacrifice that. You would have to have 1 kohen bring the 2 gzilim, these 2 pieces of wood, put them on the altar before you bring that sacrifice, even though you're not fulfilling your obligation of the korban tamid of shachar. But since you are in the end bringing that korban as it was meant to be, so you would have to bring that as well. And why didn't Rabbi Yochanan say that? Right? Because otherwise you're going to disqualify the offering. It's not done the way it was supposed to. And tamid shel bein arbaim, and the one in the afternoon, sheshachato shalol lishmo, if you did it for the sake of the wrong korban, yehi ta'un shnei gzirim b'shnei kohanim. You would need 2 pieces of wood with 2 kohanim, because that's the halacha on that one. Otherwise you're going to disqualify. So, Rabbi Yochanan, why didn't you mention those? To which the Gemara answers 2 answers. We'll do one today and one in the next daf. Inachinami. Yeah, in fact, Rabbi Yochanan would agree with all this. And El Amar Abaye Chad Minayu Nakad. He just gave one example, but he meant anything like this. And yeah, I agree with all those things. Okay, that's answer number 1. But Rav Abba, or many change the gears to the Rav Amar, he's going to say, no. I'm going to differentiate between the 2. And for that, you'll have to wait till tomorrow's daf to see. Okay, with that we finished our daf, so let's just go through what we did. We did the Chatzi Log Shemen Latoda, and we saw Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, who thought it was a Masoret, and Rabbi Akiva, who got it from the Psukim. How we get the half log is then divided, 10 loaves get a quarter of that, half of that, which is quarter log, and the other 20 get the other quarter log. So we saw both. How do we know we get a half a log, and how do we know it's divided the way it's divided? Kiva gave us all that. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, we were a little bit unsure exactly what he was referring to. Then we get to the next was the log, and the machloket about, does every korban get a log, or does every korban get a log per isaron? And we saw the machloket between the 2 of them about how to understand the pasuk about the mitzorah, the poor mitzorah, and which parts of the words to darshan to get to what we wanted, and then what does each one do with the drasha of the other. And we got the 6 log for the par, 4 for the ayil, 3 for the keves. That we saw from the pasuk of Rosh Chodesh. And all started from what is a hin. The hin is 12 log, and the way to remember that is zet in the gematria, which talks about the hin that was used for the shemen mishcha, the hin of oil. Then we got to the menorah, and how by trial and error they figured out exactly the half a log is going to get you on the longest night from evening till morning. Okay, and then how they figured it out, did they start by putting more in, or did they start by putting less in and add a little more each night? Okay, then we get to the Mishnah, which was a little complicated to figure out. Which libations can you mix and which you can't, and in what circumstances can you or can't you mix them, at what stage? And then we realized that we weren't talking about minchas, we were actually talking about wine libations. And the issue with mixing the wine is if we mix the wine, even though theoretically you really can, because it's not burned on the altar, it just gets poured on the altar, issue to mix them would be burning them together. But if you already did it and they're already mixed, then we have less of a problem with the wine. And then it was just a matter, then we had to deal with, well, it also depends on whether the doughs were mixed already. If it's an issue that one has more oil ratio than the other, then we have to have them actually mix the doughs together before we say that's really not going to be a problem. If they weren't mixed, all mixed up together, but the whole batch got mixed with that before we made separate doughs, that's going to be a problem if the ratio is different. It's not going to be a problem if the ratios are the same. Then we moved on to the keves that comes with the omer. Even though the mincha is doubled, the oil is not. We learned that from the drasha, from the kriyu chtiva v'niska. And then we ended with the statement of Rabbi Yochanan, which seems to be ignoring that one about the keves, and then, basically say, oh, well, this has to be done like that, otherwise it's not going to be done properly. in the case where it was done Shalom Lishmo. Still, the other parts have to be done right, which means Asher Mitzorah had to come with libations, and then basically they said, why you mentioned the one about the Fasim would have to be with double libations, and then, maybe Rabbi Yochanan did really mean that, or we're going to see maybe he didn't, and then we'll see why that would be. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.